It's really special to be here and very special to have followed such varied and equally inspiring talks. Insomnia. Insomnia. It's the reason I'm here today talking to you. My professional career, that is to say, the past 36 years, is thanks to insomnia. It was especially bad when I was a teenager, but I had this little clock radio next to my bed on my night table, and thanks to a station in Chicago where I grew up that broadcast classical music through the night, I was provided companionship and a connection to music that was so compelling, so magnificent, that it led me to where I am now. This music that I was listening to during the night stirred such deep personal emotion that I can actually recall the particular time, what my bedroom appeared like at a moment when I heard a certain piece of music. The sky was just becoming light the first time I heard this. And I noticed something else that seemed phenomenal to me, especially striking the first time I heard that. And that was that even though this was first hearing, there was something about the music that was strangely familiar, as though I'd known it for years, maybe all my life, but it was tucked away inside, waiting for rediscovery. Now, there is no doubt that what I'm talking about is the power of music, but there was also something about hearing that on that little speaker in the middle of the night that made it all the more remarkable. I was a piano student from the time I was age 5. There was nothing especially new to me about classical music when I stopped sleeping as a teenager and was listening to the radio. But piano students, unlike band or orchestral musicians, play alone for their formative years, and they play music that's only written for the keyboard. I wasn't really introduced to the wonders of orchestral music and music beyond piano until I was a teenager and stopped sleeping and heard this marvelous orchestral repertoire on the radio. And I really grew, well, I should say my world grew. My world expanded thanks to this musical time travel, if you will. And by that I mean I had not yet studied about the Habsburgs or ever visited Europe to feel comfortable in Vienna. I thought I knew Vienna because of Mozart and Beethoven and the waltzes of Johann Strauss Jr. This musical time travel and fantasy became something all the more so the year I turned 15. It became a refuge. My father died when I was 15. And now, in addition to not sleeping during the night, I also cried a good bit. I remember one particularly rough night. I was sobbing into my pillow. The music on the radio was playing, and suddenly I re-engaged with it. And what came through was this lyrical, exquisite, sweet passage that seemed like a balm. Nope, wrong one. There. That music, to this day, I associate with healing. And I recall, whenever I hear it, how it soothed a young girl during a night of despair and served as a reminder that beauty still remained in the world, along with something to ease the pain. There is obviously before you now the story of my relationship with radio and how much it meant to me. And when I was in graduate school, I thought maybe I'd do something about that. It was actually my first week of graduate school. I was walking past the radio and television building on my way to music school where I was enrolled, and on a lark, I thought, I'm going to see if they have any job openings. And 40 minutes later, I had a part-time job at an NPR affiliate with classical music in Bloomington, Indiana. Little did I know where this would lead. 3 years later, I was hired in Atlanta in 1979 at WABE. And in my earliest years, it was the wee hours of the morning, the early morning shift that I took. Now it was my responsibility to wake people up. And I thought several needs had to be addressed because the music had to be bright, preferably up-tempo, rousing, but never blaring, pleasing, but nothing that could put anyone to sleep. I saw it as my responsibility to get people out of bed in a good frame of mind, ready to face the day, because this could all be achieved by the music they heard as they were slipping back into consciousness, the first music they'd hear out of their dreams. So here's an example of what I think is some wonderful early morning wake-up music. Birds! research has shown that on an emotional level, there is something deeper about hearing than seeing, and something about hearing the human voice that fosters human relationships even more than seeing people. So listening to this Vivaldi, because I was listening along with you, or those of you who were born back then when I was first playing it, and I thought, oh, Antonio Vivaldi, Venice, Italy. One of the many things I adore about Italy is that Italians don't believe in understatement. You know, self-expression is emotional and intense. Visual art is sumptuous and extravagant in its beauty. And Italian music is always song, even if it's not written for the voice. But when it is vocal music, the melodies are rich and curvaceous and unforgettable. That always got people telephoning, calling, crying. And that's something else that was very enlightening for me when I began, even in Bloomington, Indiana, when I was in graduate school, being on the other side of the microphone, this relationship that can be fostered with a stranger. I discovered very early on, I was not the only one who had this deep personal connection to radio. Listeners would call often and pour out life stories, strangers telling me life stories, all because of the emotion that was conveyed from this little speaker. No doubt the power of the music, but something intrinsic about the way in which the music, or the way the music was presented, something that they connected with. So the depth of that emotion is a thread running through all of this. And maybe you have experienced a piece of music that moved you so deeply, so personally, that it rendered an otherwise ordinary moment indelible. I was on my way to pick up my 2-year-old daughter after work. She was at the babysitter. It was an ordinary day. I was stopped at Briarcliff and Johnson Road, and this music came on the radio. And all of a sudden, it just summed up all the joy I felt as I was about to see my little girl. That music, first time I heard it, was coming through the radio on a regular drive on an ordinary weekday afternoon, and I can recall exactly the picture. Sometimes a piece of music may render a different type of moment memorable for you. Our son was born 7 weeks early. Thankfully, he was healthy. And alone in a hospital room in the deep of the night, this expansive melody poured through the little radio in the hospital, and it summed up all of the relief, the joy, and the gratitude I felt. I always play that on my son's birthday. Leonard Bernstein, the great conductor and brilliant intellect, once said, "Music can name the unnameable and communicate the unknowable." And I believe that this is what listeners were experiencing. This music, as it was especially intensified in this personal experience on the radio. Because listeners would call and ask me recommendations for their weddings. I had calls about what music should I take into labor and delivery. And I had calls from listeners asking about funeral selections. This was chilling, very frightening to me. More than one listener called telling me they were planning their memorial service. And I once visited a listener in hospice. I'd never met her before. She asked to meet me, and I was very scared. So I decided, well, I'll take some CDs with and we can listen together. There was no reason to be scared. When I met her, we listened to music. She talked about how much she loved hearing WABE for many years. And I have never seen such pure delight in the moment as she was listening. I'll never forget her, and it was the most profound experience of my entire career. When asked why we read books, a famous French writer once said, "We read books to see if we are in them." I believe we listen to the radio to connect with what's in us. Thank you.